It's just a little after 10 now. We'll go ahead and get started. My name is Wes Kerr, and I want to thank you for joining the Connecting Michigan Communities Broadband Mapping webinar today. This makes the sixth webinar I believe we've completed now since October of last year. Today we're joined by Ashley Hitt, Vice President of GIS Services at Connected Nation. Ashley, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Ashley, it's great to have you on today. I guess a couple of housekeeping items for everyone before we kind of dig in, but if you've got questions, please put those in the Q&A box that should be located at the lower portion of your screen. I'll be following those along. Ashley is going to give us a presentation, and then we'll dig into Q&A later in our time. But Ashley, to get us started, I told you I'd give you a little bit of an icebreaker, and so I've started with asking a single question and getting your response. And today the question is spring, or the word is spring.
Spring. I guess thinking of spring, that makes me realize that that's the time when I need to start carrying sunscreen with me again everywhere I go. So that's my first thought.
Yeah, I promise when I thought of that word, I did not think of that. Ashley and I have worked together for a few years now, and I didn't think of that. But and I also wasn't thinking about the entire country being in sub-zero, in sub-freezing temperatures. And I have friends in Florida in the Tampa area that have been waving at me, on all my social media because I think they've been in the 70s, and literally the entire country is frozen. So we're glad to have everybody on. We hope everybody's staying warm and staying safe in the temperatures that everybody is seeing. And with that, we will get started. Ashley, I'm just going to hand it over to you and let you get us started on your presentation.
Sure, absolutely. So thank you, everyone. Like Wes said, my name is Ashley Hitt. I am the VP of GIS Services for Connected Nation, essentially responsible for all of the location intelligence, the spatial analytics that go into broadband mapping, and working very closely with our engineering and technical services teams to bring together all of the information, data, and analysis that we see. So we've got a good presentation, definitely open for any questions that you have, whether it's about any specifics for the Michigan broadband mapping project or any of the federal items that are currently underway or under discussion as well. To get us started, just want to give a quick outline of what's going to be covered today. Certainly, why is this important? Why is broadband mapping so essential? What are some of the things that are going on right now? Looking at the different types of broadband mapping and how that impacts what is physically displayed on maps. Looking at data set challenges. What are things that are going on that impact how we can use federal or state data on a very local level? Then we'll jump really solidly into Michigan data and analyses. What are all of the different products and maps, interactive maps, analyses? What are all of those different things that are available for the state that are even public now? And then certainly open it up for Q&A. I find this slide very interesting because I've given different talks to different types of groups, and 10 years ago, even there were people that didn't realize that there were people at home that did not have internet access or that there wasn't high speed available. And then of course, as we've looked at higher and higher speeds over the past decade or so, how does that impact what we're mapping? And then certainly with the COVID-19 pandemic, looking at this has become very, very clear. There are telehealth activities, there's the COVID response. How do we get vaccines to different places? What do the logistics look like of that? How does mapping play a role in that activity? Certainly the homework gap, that has been a huge part of remote learning for students across the country. And how does broadband take a huge role in that activity? How do we help identify where are the students located that don't have home internet, whether it's because the infrastructure and the access physically is not there, or is there perhaps a barrier to adopting the internet access? Is it too expensive? Do they not have a device? And so looking a little bit more holistically about the level of importance for broadband mapping activities. One thing I wanted to note about broadband mapping specifically is the difference between last mile broadband and middle mile broadband. So on the left, the image that we're looking at is what's referred to as last mile broadband, or that connection that physically goes into your house or your workplace. And then on the right side, the middle mile broadband is the actual interconnection points between your network and a node, or what does that backbone of the internet infrastructure actually look like? So today we're going to focus on the last mile broadband. How do we determine what houses, what residences have broadband access, and what does that data look like? And how do we do additional analyses on that data to really determine who is unserved, who is underserved, and who has all different kinds of access potentially across the state? With some of the data set challenges that we're looking at, there is currently a broadband data set available from the FCC. It's referred to as the Form 477. And this is a data set that broadband providers across the country have to file twice a year currently. The FCC broadband map is available. We've got a link here on the website. But unfortunately, we have found that the data is not sufficient enough or adequate enough for local broadband planning. There's several reasons for this that we'll go through. The good news is that the FCC is currently working on shifting what's currently collected with the Form 477 and shifting that to a new type of data submission where the data is going to be much more detailed, much more granular, and much more accurate so that people and the FCC can truly tell where are those unserved and underserved areas, so that when they have subsidy programs where funding is going into some of these areas across the country, we ensure that they're going to the right areas that need the most attention and focus. But with the current data set, some of the primary challenges that we're seeing, not all broadband providers are submitting the data as required. There's a variety of reasons for this, but we have been doing broadband mapping activities in multiple states and have seen that there are providers missing from this data collection for years. Perhaps there's a brand new provider that's just getting into the market that may not know all of the regulatory requirements that they need to have at the state or the federal level, but there are providers missing from the data set itself. Not all providers have GIS capabilities, and by GIS here we mean Geographic Information Systems, and that is the collection of tools and software to develop geospatial files. Where is that mapping data? What does that information look like? We can't have that location intelligence without that spatial component and that location component of the data. So if a provider does not have the resources to have their network completely mapped or to have where their locations of equipment or other infrastructure are, they might be missing a component of how to convert that to the required format. We've seen that fixed broadband data is filed as a CSV file or a spreadsheet. And so it's essentially a list of codes on census block ID codes, what type of technology is there, what type of speeds are available in each census block. And so that spreadsheet has a location component in it because of that census block ID. We know where the boundary of each of those census blocks are, but having only a spreadsheet of that information does not usually equate very, very well or very evenly with what that looks like on a map. We've also seen that the fixed wireless services are also filed as the census block list. And I'll show a couple examples in a little bit about why that has been an issue, because if we think of different towers that are available and what equipment's on them, and then we see where is the signal actually reaching? What does that footprint look like? There have been issues with converting that to census blocks, because as of right now, if even just one household within a census block can get that service, the entire census block is lit up. And that has reached some very unfortunate overstatement in terms of the data. And then, of course, reaching who's actually not served in that census block. So again, that inherent overstatement with census blocks as that unit of measure. The more rural an area is, the larger the census blocks are going to be, and therefore even higher levels of overstatement of what's being reported where broadband is available. We also have understatement issues because of some of that missing provider data. So any provider that's missing from a location, unless there's another provider serving that same exact census block, that provider's coverage is missing. If they're the only provider in a location, that area is going to show up as unserved in the 477 data, might be made eligible for different subsidies, and that provider could be overbuilt. So we're looking at a few different issues and challenges here regarding understatement and missing provider data. We also know that the data can be old by the time it's published. For instance, right now, the current publicly available 477 data is from December of 2019. So there is a bit of a lag between when providers are required to submit that data twice a year and when the FCC is able to fully combine and review and look at that information, put it in a state or national file that's then made publicly available, and then when it's released for public consumption. One last challenge that we want to look at here is that the submitted data from the provider community is not thoroughly validated. So in addition to the other challenges that we've seen in the above list, we're also looking at there's not another field work or field validation that happens to confirm the presence of these systems that are being reported. And we'll get more into detail about that and what Connected Nation Michigan has done regarding broadband mapping in the field, confirming and validating some of those service areas to make sure that we're presenting the most accurate information possible. So some of the examples I wanted to show on how these data set challenges actually look. How does this impact a map? So for instance, here, if we look at a broadband provider that offers service within the city limits or the town boundaries, perhaps it's a cable provider that has a franchise agreement with a town or city that says, any person that calls within this boundary, we can serve. So their actual service area is going to be the town boundary. But when we convert that to census blocks to file with Form 477, town boundaries don't always follow census block boundaries. And so there is a level of overstatement in what's being filed with the FCC, and all of these areas outside the town boundary are now being lit up as served when they're only in fact partially served. We see the same type of issue when we look at service availability by road segment. If a provider has, what roads they serve, they can serve various houses along these roads within so many feet of the road. We know what that service area looks like, but then again, when you translate that to a census block boundary, you start to see a lot of overstatement just inherently based on the size of census blocks. They're technically submitting correct data because they're identifying the census blocks in which they have some level of service. But in terms of being able to use this information to then focus expansion efforts, you're at a bit of a disadvantage. Same is going to be true of fixed wireless data. I had mentioned earlier that this unfortunately is also being submitted as census block boundaries in the current form of data being submitted to the FCC. And so when our engineering team will produce propagation models where we actually look at the information, where are the towers located, what type of equipment, what frequency, what spectrum, the height of the equipment above the ground. And we actually are able to figure out how far can that signal reach and what speeds. So we produce these propagation models that we see here, but then again, translating that to a census block boundary creates a lot of overstatement. A couple other examples of looking at actual provider data. So on the left here, we're looking at a provider's actual Form 477 submission. And we can see that it's a little bit blocky, for lack of a better term. But you start to see these shapes that aren't quite logical for a telecom network. And so when we worked with that provider, we were able to get their actual service area. So the one in the middle in green, this is the actual location of where their service area is located. And so we can see that there are census blocks that they submitted that they don't serve, and there are census blocks that they didn't submit that they do in fact serve. So when we take that green map in the middle, translate it to the census blocks that should have been filed, it's more accurate, but still there's that level of overstatement and also understatement in what they had originally filed. We see the same thing here. Unfortunately, we've seen this a little bit more commonly where fixed wireless providers, perhaps they have a billing system that says they can export the data needed to file with the FCC. And so this unfortunate map on the left is what had been submitted for a fixed wireless provider, and it only identified census blocks where they had current customers rather than where their actual service area is located. So unfortunately, in this case, there's a huge amount of understatement in where services are actually available. So we have worked with This provider, we have developed their actual service area based on all of their tower locations, whatever assets they're using to broadcast that signal, to create what is that service area actually look like, and then what should their submission to the FCC have looked like. So all across the board, we're seeing levels of overstatement, understatement, and what the Connected Nation Michigan broadband mapping project is really trying to do is continue to look at actual broadband service areas that are independent of census blocks, because the main idea there is that telecom networks do not follow census block boundaries. And so we want to get the independent data that will show exactly where that service area is located, by what technology, what speeds are available to residences, so that we can compile all of that information and find out what areas are truly unserved so that we can make that difference in those locations. Another quick example of some of the data set challenges that have existed. This is an example from Walton County, Florida, but it really brings home what we're working with here. So the orangish gold areas on the map here are representative of that 477 data set. So according to the FCC, these are those census blocks that have broadband service with speeds of at least 25 by 30. And we had an engineering team that literally drove every single road in the county and made infrastructure and asset maps of where all telecom equipment, all telecom infrastructure, all networks are located. And as we can start to see in this zoomed in image, the purple is where we were actually able to confirm the presence of broadband networks. And so the orange then is the overstatement. We did not find any evidence of broadband networks within that gold area. So we're looking at a huge amount of overstatement, again, not just because of the census block boundaries, but also some inaccuracies within the filings themselves. Perhaps, again, providers don't have a system that can develop this information or to really map the networks and then convert that to the file that has to be submitted twice a year. So bringing this a little bit more closer to Michigan, we're going to look at several different data and analyses to show what has been done. But as far as what Connected Nation has been doing overall, the GIS or the spatial analytics team, as well as our engineering and technical services team, have worked very closely for over a decade on Michigan mapping. And the way we've done that is to group together several different aspects. First one being independent research, having our trained staff being able to look at telecom databases, membership lists, the different telecom associations, the Public Utility Commission filings and information that will be filed at the state level in addition to the federal level. Being able to do that independent research has really made a difference in how we start the conversation with providers. And then, of course, we move into that provider relationship, being able to work very closely with providers to talk about the project. What are we trying to map? What's the purpose? How can they benefit from this? What are some of the other things that this information is going to be used for? And then after we are able to develop a set of maps for a location, we also have a field validation component. So our same engineering and technical services staff that are working with the providers to collect information on where their services and where their network is available, or we're also going out into the field to confirm that information is accurate and correct. We do provide information back to providers to show what we found, so that they can update their systems. Perhaps if something is damaged in the field, maybe it's because of a recent storm, or even a car accident or something. If we find any damaged equipment out in the field, we will make sure that a provider knows about that. And then additionally, if we find areas that have not been mapped, we want to make sure the provider knows about that, as well as refining or correcting coverage that may be overstated. So that provider relationship is very important because we use that for the collection of information as well as the editing and refinement of information as well. And then the fourth component that has really made this more successful is resident feedback. After maps are published, we want to make sure that people are viewing the maps, letting us know where they're incorrect. We really want that feedback from people in those local areas to be able to say, hey, this map says I have 3 providers, I only have 1, or it says I have this speed, but I can't get that speed, or I don't have broadband at all, and the map says I do. We want all of that feedback so that we can then refine that, review it, make those edits for the next version of the map that comes out. And I'll show an example of some of the types of information we collect and what that form looks like. So jumping into some of the maps and things that are produced, this just a sample of some of the information and analyses that are available. We do have PDF maps at the statewide and county level that are posted on the Connected Nation Michigan website. We also have an interactive map with several different data layers and analyses to really create your own customized view of. But here, just an example on the left of the 25:3 broadband availability map. We do have this split into a couple different colors. So there's a darker green that indicates the service area being displayed is more detailed and more accurate and granular. We have a little bit higher confidence that that information is correct and that residents within that shape can actually receive service. And then there's a lighter green color on the same map that indicates that there's a little bit less confidence in that service area being able to reach everybody within that color. And so in this case, what we're seeing is that, if a provider is unable or unwilling to participate in the broadband mapping project, we might have to rely on Form 477 data as a starting point. And so that information would be reflected in the lighter green color. And so any residents or household within that light green color, that is where we have a little bit less confidence, and we would like to receive more feedback on what's truly available at that location. Those areas will also be highlighted for potential field validation activities, so that when our engineers go in the field, we can confirm what's there and hopefully change that color from light green to dark green and have higher confidence in what we're truly showing on the map. The map on the right here is showing the maximum available speeds by couple different speed combinations. So here, the darker the color, the higher the speed that's available. And then there you can start to see in the bottom left corner there that there are some statistics on how many households are physically served at each of those speed combinations that are listed on the map. And then just real quickly, we also have these available for every single county. These are just kind of zoomed in versions of the maps I just showed. And so again, dark green and light green showing the difference in the type of data that makes up that map. And then again, on the right, showing the maximum speeds that are available, darker the color, higher the speed. And then of course, the interactive map. This is truly where everything comes together. Kind of your one-stop shop for all the different types of data, all the different analyses, being able to zoom into different levels, print, share. That's where all of this truly comes together. So we've got the link here. This presentation will be shared on the website afterwards, so you'll be able to get some of these links as well. But here is where we really start to see all of these components come together. One tool rather that people can do on the website is there's a locate providers by address function. And so you can type in an address, you can click a location on the map, and then it will query the data that is part of this to show what providers are providing service to that location, what technology is there, what download and upload speed are there. And then if you can, the very bottom right of that black box there does say, is there incorrect information? Let us know. And you can click that link to let us know, hey, I don't have this provider, or I don't have this speed. And that way we can use that feedback for the next iteration of the map. So we definitely want to receive that local feedback very, very much. Another thing that you can do, for example, on the interactive map is that if you're interested in more of an education component, you can look at all of the different schools within the state or a county. You can look at school district boundaries and then compare that to residential broadband service so that you can identify which school districts have higher levels of broadband availability to all the students in that district, or perhaps those are the ones that are lacking and might need more attention to get broadband services to those students so they can do remote learning, so they can be able to do homework once the kids are back in school, all of those different components. So you can create all of these different customized views on the interactive map. One last analysis I want to show on the interactive map is also looking at unserved areas. So this is looking specifically at areas that don't have 100 meg service. And this is by census block, how many households are in each area that doesn't have this service. So providers, if they are looking to apply for grants or loans to expand broadband service, they can get additional details about how many households they might potentially be able to serve if they were to expand to that area. So again, here, the darker the color, the more households there are that do not have service in that area. So we're showing higher population and higher household densities that do not have a specific level of service. So all of that data is available by technology, by speed combination. We've got different boundaries on there that you'll be able to look at and create those customized views. So if you have a specific aspect of broadband or demographics that you're looking for, there is a lot of information on the interactive map. One thing that we also do after all of the data is compiled for a specific time frame is that we are calculating some statistics. We are looking at availability estimates on how many households are served and unserved at the state, at the county, different technologies. So here we have some charts. These are all available on the website as well. This is just one example of several that are available, where we're looking at how does household availability change from different speed combinations. And so certainly the higher the speed gets, the less number of people that are actually served. And so currently the FCC definition of broadband is 25 by 3. And so if that ends up getting increased, which we've heard, and ideally it will, because as we need more bandwidth to accomplish more things, to transfer more data, to accomplish more at home with telework and telehealth and homework, remote learning, we're going to need to increase the minimum speeds that are capable of doing that for a household. And so as those speeds increase, we're going to see more people that are unserved. And so we want to make sure that those level of statistics get out so that we know how many households we're talking about at these different speed tiers. This is just a quick screenshot of the resident feedback form. So a few slides ago when we were looking at the interactive map and being able to let us know there's incorrect information, this is the link that this form goes to. And I know it sounds extremely ironic for someone to be able to say, I don't have broadband service and fill out a web form. But we have made this a very, very light form so that it does work on a mobile phone. And then that way, if somebody has cellular service or when they're out and about, they would be able to fill out this form and say, here's my address, here's where I'm located. I do not have broadband. And so that we can use that information to refine the map, but then also identify where people are truly located that don't have service and want it and need it. So this form allows you to enter in that, very basic information of what's my location, what's the problem? Is there an issue with the map? Is there an issue with your service? You can let us know in this form. And then you'll also be able to identify and pinpoint on the map where exactly you're located. We've certainly seen in some rural and very remote areas that, even if you enter in that address on, say, Google Maps or any of the other systems where you're trying to locate an address, it may not be exactly right. Maybe down the street a little bit, but the system that we have here will let you actually move the pin to exactly where you're located so we can get it as correct as possible. A couple other things that we're doing across the state and other states as well as part of our field validation work. So after we have produced broadband maps, or even if we're starting from scratch to say what kind of assets and infrastructure exist in a location, our engineering and technical services team will actually go out and map all of those different things. Are they seeing cable nodes? Are they seeing DSLAMs? Are they seeing cabinets? Are they seeing fiber markers? Where are the routes located, whether they are aerial or in the ground? They're able to track all of that and map all of that information so that we can create a better broadband map to show what's already in existence and where is there truly nothing. Where is a community perhaps having to start at square one to do this? Also on the field validation side, we're looking at the difference between wireline and wireless broadband. So wireline would be your DSL service, cable, and fiber. Where is that infrastructure in the ground? If we're validating where a provider has built out service, what does that look like? What are we seeing? What kind of assets and infrastructure are we looking at, and documenting that information as well? And then on the wireless side, we're creating those propagation models. So like the green map in the middle there, where can service physically reach based on the equipment that we're seeing on towers, water tanks. And then the bottom middle picture is actually from a spectrum analyzer. So when we take our equipment out into the field and we are testing to see what signals we can actually reach at a specific location, how strong are they, what type of frequency are they coming over, we can use that to help validate broadband services as well. A couple last items just on what we're doing at the community level and in some regional aspects of the state. We have the Connected Community Engagement Program. And so as we are working with counties and communities across the state, this map, for instance, is showing where to the minimum 25x3 broadband service is located in that bluish color. And then the dots are either red or blue, indicating where people are taking our surveys and then answering a series of questions. Is their current internet meeting their needs? Do they not have internet at all? And then us being able to use that information to then again further refine the maps that we have, make them more accurate and better for next time. We also look at vertical asset inventories. There's a couple of these that have been done in a couple of regions across Michigan. So this map, for instance, is looking at the Northeast Michigan counties, and we have created this inventory of where all the vertical assets are located. We have taken pictures of what each of these assets look like, which was what we saw on some of that field validation slide a minute ago. We want to know different aspects of that vertical asset. So if that asset is in an area that does not have broadband service, that could be a location where equipment is installed. Does that location have power? Do they already have a backbone to the internet installed? Is there space for additional equipment? So those are some of the things that we're trying to track so that we can look at unserved areas and the most efficient and quickest way to get more people connected. And then lastly, wanted to show the Wi-Fi hotspot location map. As soon as COVID started and schools started getting shut down, obviously knowing that there are a lot of locations across the state that do not have broadband access at home, we wanted to look and collect information on where public Wi-Fi hotspots are available. And so through a collection of information from various providers, libraries, schools, other public and community center information, people are submitting that information to us to say, oh, I have a network that's available, whether it's, unfortunately people going to a parking lot just to access the internet. This map is also available on a mobile phone so that people can type in, where they're at or ping their exact location, and the map will show where are the closest Wi-Fi hotspots to their location. And as you can see on the right side, if a library or whatever the facility is that's offering that has a certain network ID, password, they've provided some of that information as well. So we're really trying to connect people, even if it's just, I hate to say a Band-Aid, to get connectivity at a more urgent level. We're trying to get that information out as well. But overall, all of these components come together for broadband mapping activities. We are working on a data collection right now. We will be starting that soon so that we have a new set of broadband maps that will be available in the fall that will incorporate any of the feedback that we've received from residents, from providers, what upgrades have been made, what expansion areas have occurred, and bringing all of that information together to create a new broadband map in September. So any feedback that you all have as you view the maps, the interactive map, let us know what you're seeing and what areas are incorrect so that we can work with providers and to make them more accurate for the next map that we've got. And with that, I want to turn it back over to Wes and see what kind of questions that we have. But there is a link here at the bottom for anybody who's interested in going to view any of the, whether it's the PDF maps or the interactive maps, everything is located off the link in this page.
Ashley, thank you. Let you try to get a little bit of a breather, I guess. But we have a few questions that have come in, and a couple of things I'll go ahead and try to address, and you'll keep me honest here. I know one of the questions that came in was about satellite internet. Is it included in our definition of broadband? And they apologize for such a basic question, but it's really not a basic question because there's so many different caveats that we would put around satellite technology. And we don't include satellite on our maps or in our calculations. And we don't represent it because typically the satellite providers say that they can offer service anywhere, and in general those services are available in most locations. So we don't include those. Some of the providers now are providing much faster speeds than they were even 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And so we don't include those in our calculations or in the representation on the maps. And certainly, we've talked on this webinar and in other podcasts and things recently that, we're monitoring the new technology, satellite technologies, low Earth orbit technologies. There are pilots going on, particularly even in Michigan, with those technologies. And while they may be promising at the moment, we still don't know exactly what those technologies are going to prove out. Probably going to remain, at least initially, kind of a service for those who just simply have no other options, right? But we are seeing some really good speeds from those initial pilots, and is kind of exciting because it may open the door for a lot of truly rural locations who have never had options to have access to much higher quality technology than they've had in the past. So that's one. Ashley, there was a couple of questions. One of them was, what's changed about mapping over the past couple of years? So if you were looking at maps 2 years ago, how big of a difference do we have in maps now, essentially? And then the question then kind of leans towards what good does this mapping do? How do we use it to convince providers to build out in these areas where there's just not been a case in the past? And if you want to handle that first piece, I'm happy to touch on the last.
Fair enough. So in terms of how mapping has changed over the past several years, there have been a number of enhancements and innovations that have occurred. Looking 20 years ago, when there were different maps of perhaps equipment locations and maybe buffering a circle a certain distance from that equipment location or a tower location to at least start the estimate of where that service could reach. Things have gotten a lot more detailed in the past 20 years, and then even, of course, over the past 5 and 10 years, where we're able to be more detailed. We're able to create propagation models of where signals are actually going to reach. We're able to do different network analysis on if you've got an equipment location and a certain speed can be reached if a household is within 5,000 what we call wireline feet from the equipment location, and then that speed gets slower and slower as you get further away. We're able to get very detailed in what services are available where. So that would be definitely kind of the overall change that has occurred. And that is, based on individual providers, individual technology, being able to work with them on exactly what is available where to create service areas and derive that information that can then be aggregated to produce a county or statewide map to show where are people unserved. So certainly we focus on where those service areas are so that we can get to the unserved or underserved part of connecting communities. And then on the federal side, we're seeing a big shift to, again, get even more detailed. What is the list of addresses that cannot get service? So we're taking even a step further. So with some of the new FCC programs that are coming out for federal broadband mapping, it's going to be even more detailed, looking at specific addresses. So that way, when the FCC has a subsidy program that is going to give providers money to expand into unserved areas, instead of estimates based on census blocks that say, hey, we think there's 50 households in this area, they'll be able to say there are exactly X number of households and here's exactly where they're located, so that providers can have better estimates on what it's going to cost to build out and get those people connected. So very much the level of detail is probably the biggest change that we've seen in broadband mapping over the past decade plus.
Yeah, thanks, Ashley. And just to add to that, as it pertains to how we leverage the information, the data is, I think one of the best examples is when you were showing the Leelanau map there a moment ago, and all of that information, that survey data that shows where people are and what types of service they're subscribing to, or if they can or can't subscribe, and the level of many of the questions there, would you like to see additional options? That type of information can then be leveraged to show a provider, yeah, we know that there's a smaller number of homes in a particular location, which is where it's most difficult to build services to, but these individuals are interested, they want services, and you're really kind of changing the equation of build out for a provider when you can show them that there is a level of adoption there that's of interest for adoption in a particular area that may very well change whether a provider could attempt to build in a particular area. That's a great question. Real quick, there was a question about fixed wireless. What receive antenna height is used for determining if receive a signal. Typically, our engineers, actually, again, you can correct me here, but I think we're usually at about 15 feet, which would be a rooftop. And recognize that with propagation modeling, it's not a perfect science by any means. But we try to be conservative in those estimations. We try to be conservative in power. And so when our team is working with a provider to represent what a fixed wireless coverage would look like, we try to adjust for heavier than normal topologies and foliage and those types of things. And then we try to use the conservative, roughly 15 or so foot rooftop type of receive rate. And then typically, based on whatever provider tells us where their equipment is hung on that height, that's how we then work with our engineering team to pick those areas. Is that a fair way to describe that, Ashley?
Definitely. There are so many parameters that go into the engineering studies for propagation models. It can be overwhelming. So definitely those strong relationships with the providers to figure out what spectrum, what frequency, what power, what transmit frequency, all of these different things that go into creating what that propagation model looks like. And of course, altering any one of those will completely change the shape. So we work back and forth with the providers on what their system looks like, what each tower or vertical asset location looks like. And then also doing that field validation to make sure that when we produce or develop these propagation models, that if there's any refinement that needs to be made, that we find those areas where the signal does not reach so that we can take that into account to update the map.
Thank you. And looking through some more of these questions here, there's been a couple of notes about the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, RDOF. You mentioned it briefly. It is on the interactive map. You all have posted where the winning locations are, I guess, or census blocks are, and they're inside the interactive map. We could, what's there is simply what we know at this point. The provider community just came out of essentially a quiet period where they were filing their final financials, business plans and those types of things that were necessary kind of post the auction. And so we're still learning that. We don't currently have any inside information about where those plans, where they're going to go work and start their build outs and whatnot. Although that is something that with our communities, we're certainly trying to help. We're trying to understand. We're having conversations with providers so that when they begin to make those plans known, we can work with communities to help them essentially, just manage through that process and communicate well with the provider community and begin to set expectations for what build out under RDOF will look like. As a quick reminder, that's a 6-year build out term. Providers will be paid out monthly over a 10-year time frame for those builds. So whether a particular area is in the next 6 months or is going to be towards the end of that 6-year time frame, we simply don't know those the ins and outs of that at this point. There's a note here about the FCC's broadband serviceable location. Ashley, you'll like this one. It's coming later this year. Is it clear how local governments and municipalities can challenge provider data submitted at the federal level?
Great question. So that is definitely information that is more forthcoming. The FCC just last month released another report and order specific to so their new program that is going to kind of overhaul the Form 477 that we talked about in the beginning. That is called the Digital Opportunity Data Collection, or DODC. And part of that is this serviceable location fabric. And so basically, there's going to be an address point data set for the entire country. Where is every single location that should have broadband access? and being able to overlay broadband provider service areas with that. So then we can determine exactly which households are served, underserved, and unserved moving forward. But like you mentioned, the states and local communities have a very important role to play in that challenge process. There will be different details available at a later date, but as of right now, what we're seeing is that there is going to be a challenge process as part of this new national broadband map and this new system, so that individual residents, states, local governments will be able to file these challenges either on the address location side. So if perhaps, if 123 Main Street isn't displaying in the location where 123 Main Street truly is, a challenge can be filed on that to say, nope, this is incorrect. This is where that address is actually located. And then as a second component of that, being able to challenge the broadband data, and where it says, oh, 123 Main Street has this list of providers, these technologies, these speeds, that can be challenged as well. So certainly as we get more details on how exactly local governments and states can challenge that type of information, we will certainly get it out to everybody, because we will certainly try to assist as much as possible in compiling that information, getting it submitted, and then providers will have, right now they list a 60-day window for providers to adjudicate and respond to challenges. So if a certain provider, somebody submits something that says, hey, my address, it does not have this provider or this speed or technology, that information will go directly to the provider and they will have 60 days to respond to that, either providing evidence that they do in fact have a service there, and perhaps there's just a misunderstanding of what is there, or if it's not in fact there and their data needs to be updated, then that will be handled in that way as well. But we'll definitely get more details out on exactly how communities and states can challenge that information.
Yeah, and with that, Ashley, we've still got a handful of questions in here, but our time we've now gone well past our time, and so to all that have submitted questions, I will personally do some follow up over the next day or so here. I'll also provide those questions to Ashley and ensure that we're providing you with accurate questions. A lot of technical kind of stuff in there now that we want to make sure we respond to you accurately on. I will put my plug in. We will have another webinar in a couple of weeks. We'll be talking on digital literacy with Connected Nations Heather Gate, and look forward to that opportunity. I'll send out as well, as Ashley mentioned, this slide deck and the reminders for that next webinar within the next 2 to 3 days, most likely. With that, we hope everybody has a safe and warm day, and we thank you for your time. Goodbye.